Hi there, and welcome to the Kingdom Sexuality podcast.
We are Paris
Alana,
and Rusty,
friends who have a heart for intimacy and long to uncover God's truth and design for sexual freedom within marriage. Welcome here.
Welcome back, Kingdom Sexuality family. As Alana and I sit down to record this, we are celebrating our 2-year Kingdom Sexuality ministry anniversary, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just amazing. It's just amazing reflecting on how far God has brought this. And we just want to say we are so thankful for you guys. If it weren't for you guys, this ministry would look very, very different. So each and every one of you are very, very, very pivotal to this entire journey. Mm-hmm. And we just wanted to say that. Today, we're going to talk about libido and sex drives. This is something that we more often than not are addressing constantly in our DMs. And we're like, man, we should really devote an episode to this because there are some things we want to debunk and there is some truths that we want to shed light on. So we're going to talk about our libido today, okay? We're going to talk about men libido. We're going to talk about women's libido. We're going to talk about libido within marriage and how it is absolutely a balancing act. And we also want to call out some harmful worldviews and even some purity culture views that have been really directed towards the Christian circle when it comes to quote unquote high drive, low drive spouses. Right. And we want to talk about that too. So Alana, before we start, is there anything you want to say about this?
Well, I think going back to, how we get messages from people, often like women, right? And they're like, I don't know what to do. My desire for sex is so much higher than my husband's. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? I feel so alone. No one else experiences this, which we get so many messages like that. So you're very much not alone in that. Can I just tell you? But what's interesting to me is we are not getting those messages from men. We're not getting messages from the husbands being like, what's wrong with me? I have a higher drive than my wife. And so it's interesting to just think about it reversed and just to wonder why is this a big issue?
Yeah. Why are the women feeling isolated who are in this position? What is the cause that's making them feel that way?
Totally. And so I think it is maybe a matter of like somehow like purity culture, embedding that in us just with the whole men always desire sex and they always are looking at you with lust and I don't know, but cover up, make sure everything's covered because their eyes are always watching you and whatever. And so I think that innately puts this in women to not have that desire because it's on the men. Like the men have this. And so obviously this isn't for me, this is for the men. And so then when we do get married and we're like, hold up, I actually desire this more than my husband does. Yeah. Then it's like, well, hold up. I have never heard of this because this is not what culture has told me.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of us just talking about it and making it commonplace to be like, no, like it's normal to have differing sex drives. It's common in relationships for you not to be on the same page. It would be more uncommon for you to both be on the same level all the time. Like, so I think just to normalize that and talk about it more often to make these couples who are struggling in this feel seen and feel, not outcasted by how they're feeling inside, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you said that because that segues really, really beautifully into one of the other big points that we really wanted to talk on. And it's that everybody has differing sexual desires and their own unique libido, if you will. I feel like oftentimes when we talk about libido, we talk about sex drive. It's just like a blanket term and no one thinks about it past that. Like that it's actually a uniquely individualistic thing to each specific person. Just like it's unique that each of us, we all have fingers, but all of our fingerprints are different than everybody else's. We all have sex drives. We've all been created to be sexual beings by our God, but each of our own sexualities is so vastly different. So if we could take it from that lens and really embrace that within ourselves, honestly, I believe that it would create a movement within marriages where they're able to bring balance and just remove so many of those sexual anxieties that we
Yeah.
get around different libido, and
Mhm.
it would just be a whole new curve, you know?
Yeah.
So that's something that we really wanted to share too, is this is unique to each person, and that's the way God created us to be. It's
Mhm.
no different than every other aspect of our lives, right? Our sexuality is also incredibly uniquely different to each of us and unique.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes to, okay, this is another thing we're going to segue into. When it comes to talking about this, you know, oftentimes we're then questioned with, okay, so how do you deal with the high drive spouse and the low drive spouse? And what we want to say to that is, should we even be using those terms when you
Mm.
think of it? Because we have had quite a few couples come to us, and that's become an identity. They are
Right.
like, yeah, I am the low drive. So my desire for sex is less, which actually makes them feel like their sex drive and their desires have been diminished.
Right.
And that's incredibly damaging. And it's
Mhm.
actually so, 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 so sad. So without us meaning to, you know, label, oh yeah, you're high drive, I'm low drive. We're not meaning that as something that is derogatory, but it is coming across. We're seeing this message come across as an identity now. And that
Yeah.
is really, really dangerous. So we want to call that out
Yeah.
and just encourage you to have that conversation with your spouse. You know, if that has been commonplace language in your marriage to refer to each other as high drive, low drive, talk about how that's made you feel. If that's become an identity for you, if that label has become something that's diminished you,
Mhm.
and maybe change how you're talking about this. You know, oftentimes, you know, just for a really real life example, when Neil and I are talking about this, because you guys will get to this yet, but there's differing seasons where your libido changes, right? And so when Neil and I are in any of those seasons and things are changing for one of us, you know, whether it's stressful season or just a different part of my cycle, and I will just talk about it like, yeah, like I'm just my sex drive is just not, it's not amped up right now. My libido is just not up there like it was a week ago. And there's never this, oh, she's low drive or now she's high drive, which I really truly took for granted for a long time that Neil never talked about that to me.
Mm.
You know, he
Right.
never used that language to me.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting back, you know, as we've done a lot of work in this ministry and a lot of behind the scenes conversations. And I'm just like, I'm really thankful because if he had, when we were going through a lot of our own sexual struggles in our early marriage, I really think I would have taken that on as an identity and it would have been really crushing to me.
Right.
And it would have made me demean my sexuality all the more because I already struggled with it. You know, I already struggled with embracing that as a God given gift. Coming out of purity culture, I was like,
Mhm.
but isn't it wrong? Isn't it dirty? You know?
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage you guys to really be conscious of the language that you're using and talk to your spouse about how they feel about that.
Yeah. Something too, Paris, that comes to mind when you were talking about it is having that sort of label as like a continuously like, oh, I am the lower drive. I feel like that can easily make you complacent where you are
Absolutely.
because you're stuck in this sort of rut of thinking, well, no, this is just who I am. This is just how it is. Versus, maybe, yeah, maybe it's just have something to do with stress or like environmental things around you or your
Yes.
cycle or things like that, that your
Yeah.
libido has lowered, but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're always a lower drive spouse. Like I think it could
Absolutely.
easily, you could be like, oh no, like this is just how my sex drive is, has like to your spouse and be
Mm-hmm.
like, this is just how it is. Like we'll just
Mm-hmm.
have to get used to it because this is how my body is. Versus, okay, maybe it was for a season, but now you're just so used to being like, no, I don't really feel like it. My body's not ready for it or whatever. Versus like, how can we be changing our mindset and working with our bodies
Yes.
to get there and raise
Yes.
it?
Yeah. My mom, you're reminding me of something she always told me growing up. And to this day, she'll still tell it to me. And she'll talk about my stinking thinking if I'm getting into a rut in my headspace, right? She'll be
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, but what you say, what you think is what you become, it's what you
Yeah.
believe. And that rings true for here too. Even just what you mentioned, Alana, like if we're like, oh, I am the low sex drive, spouse. I do have a low sex drive. I don't desire sex.
Yeah.
You know, and you're constantly feeding yourself these thoughts. Just sit back and just, what do you think your body's going to do with those messages? And also
Yeah.
your spouse, you know, how is that going to make them feel as well? Sexuality is an incredible gift that we've been given, and God has absolutely given us all the capacity to enjoy it immensely. And it is just a journey, more of a journey for some than others, because we all come into marriage with dirt. We all come into marriage with a story, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. So talking back to kind of what we mentioned before, because I actually am like a little bit more clueless in this area. Like this is something that I don't specialize in, but I know Paris, like this is something that is totally your jam. How does, like, from a woman's perspective, how does their cycle influence their drive? And
Tremendously. I
yeah.
love that you asked this, because I honestly believe if we as women were to have a really beautiful understanding and almost embrace our cycles, because the world has also really tainted that for ourselves,
Mm,
you know, like it's really tainted our cycles and how we relate to just being a woman.
right.
But if we were to really sit back and embrace that and understand the role that our cycles play within our sexuality, we would have a lot more grace and a lot more wins for
Mm,
how we are expressing ourselves sexually to our spouse and enjoying sex as a whole,
right.
because there is different places throughout our cycles that God is literally turn on all these little warning lights in our body. It's like, okay, you know, if you are pregnant right now, you know, after you ovulate, if you are pregnant right now, your sex drive is going to go plummet,
Mm,
because all of your energy in your body, your hormones are all focused in this protect mode, if you will.
right.
You know, it's growing a baby potentially. We don't know until we start menstruating again. And so naturally, our libido lowers after
Hmm.
we ovulate. Everything kind of just is on a gradual downhill until we start coming back up to menstruation. And so that's natural and normal. And that's how God made us. It is
Yeah.
something for that God has done for our bodies so that we can have the means to rest and to heal and rejuvenate during that time if huge new oncoming changes are coming, like a pregnancy. So
Right. Hmm.
throughout your month to month cycle, like it's so, I love encouraging women, just track it. Write down, okay, like I wanted my husband all of these days. Like literally write it down. Kind of keep like a sex journal around your own cycle and kind of see the rhythm. There's often a rhythm to it.
Hmm.
And that's important to kind of keep track of. Most women find like right before they start bleeding, like before the first day of their period, a couple days before that, to maybe a couple days after ovulation, that's when they are very responsive. Arousal comes a lot more simply. They
Right.
just desire their husbands. They want to be pursued. They want to be fulfilled sexually. And that's a natural, normal part of our cycles. And that's normally about 2 weeks of the month that we are feeling that way. The other 2 weeks, it looks very different woman to woman, but typically that's when things peter off a little bit. So having that understanding, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm normal. It's not like what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
2 weeks,
Yeah.
nothing. I didn't want anything. But the two
Yeah.
weeks before that, I was like, I couldn't get my hands off my husband, you know, and just kind of putting those puzzle pieces together and
Yeah.
give us a lot more grace for ourselves and understanding as a couple around your own sexuality and
Yeah.
creating a good balance and rhythm within your marriage, right?
Yeah.
Within your own sexuality.
Oh, totally. To even explain
Yeah.
that to your husband so he understands, like, I
Oh,
think
yeah. The
that's
lights will go on.
huge.
He'll be like, thank you.
Oh, yeah,
I love you.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think honestly, we should do a whole episode on that and just really go into the nitty gritty of it just so women can know, because gosh, I wish I had known this years ago too.
Mm,
Like once I realized this, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. I feel so free now. I feel good. Like I know what's going on in my
right.
body and I don't feel guilty about things. You know, I would even
Right.
take on guilt being like, why do I literally not want him right now? Like
Mhm.
what is going on?
Right?
So yeah,
But you can
so
see how
funny.
it'd be so easy for a woman to be like, "What's wrong with me?" in that moment,
Yes,
and just be like
exactly.
so discouraged and feel upset
Hmm.
and feel like they have themselves to blame for things that are going on where it's like
Absolutely.
these things are totally out of your control. So,
They
yeah.
are.
yeah, really wise to, I think, have those conversations with your spouse to be like, hey, so this is kind
Absolutely.
of what my cycle does, and this is kind of how I feel during
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Again, maybe with that
Yeah.
sex journal, just be like, let me show you my journal.
Yes. It is really, truly super empowering to just have grace for yourself,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
It's a good little thing to implement.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, obviously, outside of that, we could go into there's different seasons where
Mm,
your sex drive is going to be affected by seasons of life,
yeah.
like stress, pregnancy, postpartum. Those are all seasons of life where we cannot stress enough how important it is for you guys just to be on the same page with communication
Yeah.
and just try to get through that as gracefully as possible,
Yeah.
because your sex drive will be suffering throughout a lot of those seasons, or you're going through grief, or you're going through a
Yeah.
huge, a career fell through, whatever it may be, family issues, even. I mean, Alana and I are in this boat right now. We're raising little ones. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
there's days where it's very taxing, or everybody's just on the verge of meltdowns, and it absolutely plays into your entirety as a whole, as a person.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day, your sexuality is just going to be like, no, no,
Mhm.
go. I need a rest.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's totally normal for those ebbs and flows of life to come and go. And I know
It
it can
is.
be easy when you're in it to be like, "Oh my goodness, when's the last time we had sex?" Like it's
Yeah.
been a long time because life
Hmm.
is busy and you each have your own things on the go, then it just kind of falls to the wayside. Um, but just know that yes, that is normal, and yes, this happens to everyone, happens to us. Like we're not,
Hmm.
you know, excluded from this experience, but
Yeah.
it's also important to then talk about it. Like you said, Paris, to have that communication open the whole time, to be like, hey, this just isn't really on my radar. How are you feeling with it? Is there,
Yeah.
if this is on your radar, what can we be doing instead of, actual
Hmm.
intercourse if it's kind of just off the table right now? Um,
Yes.
yeah, just keeping those lines of communication open is going to be huge because it's really easy to, in those moments when you're each having your own things on the go and it's just not being
Hmm.
prioritized, where
Yeah.
walls can go up and there can be hurt feelings or
Hmm.
things can be said, why don't you ever initiate sex anymore, or what's wrong with you, like why don't we want to have sex, and why haven't you desired me, or whatever. Like I think to just avoid those hurtful
Yes.
conversations that don't need to be had, to keeping your
Yeah.
selves as a team and a unity, like a
Mhm.
unit
Mhm.
of two of you, right? To just be like,
Mhm.
hey, we just need to lay this out on the table and talk openly and
Yes.
honestly with each other about it.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And I love that you said that, because it really does come back down to, are you prioritizing, and do you even view this as an entity within your marriage? And that is sexual
Mm,
compatibility.
right.
I think a lot of times that is just not on the forefront of our minds. I know for the first fresh years of our marriage, like I never even had that thought. Like, what is sexual compatibility? How do you bring in balance? How do you have those conversations? It just felt so foreign to me, because my understanding coming out of purity culture was you're just a yes woman,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you lose your identity in your own
Hmm.
sexuality from it. And there's so many damaging lies that come from that. But praise the Lord for that He is our healer,
Hmm.
and for this ministry, and for so many people who have really poured into this, and brought this ministry, and the Lord has brought so much freedom to, oh gosh, hundreds of marriages already.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Hmm.
And people are starting to realize that they can achieve sexual compatibility despite whatever differences are on the table. When you have exactly what you said, the mindset to be a unit, and you're pursuing that unity together, and that is your goal focus, like everything is just going to flow a lot more easier. Even when you're in the hard seasons, you'll be able to have conversations without taking offense, like those kinds
Hmm.
of things.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful network of just growth upon growth when you get to that understanding, and you open up the conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And maybe you're not even sure how to do that. And so maybe it just really starts with prayer to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and just begin to
Yeah.
pray over your marriage if that's something you haven't, started implementing already. Um, and if your husband needs a resource to pray over you, we have that on our website. I can link that below,
Yes.
because it's just a beautiful
Yes.
way to just be like, here are some things, here are some ways you can be praying for me.
Absolutely.
And even asking your husband, how can I be praying for you? How can we be praying strategically for our marriage?
Yes.
Because there's a plan for your marriage. And even in our
Yes.
missional marriage episode, the Lord put the two of you together for purpose,
Mm-hmm.
for his kingdom. And so
Mm-hmm.
that comes down to making sure, like we said, you are on the same team as a couple to then go and do that mission and that those dreams that God has placed in your heart as a couple, even beyond sexuality, just even for the Lord's
Mm-hmm.
kingdom, right? And so I think even to close it off, thinking of Psalms 139 and,
Mm-hmm.
the Lord, knit you in your mother's womb. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And not only that, but he knows the level that you experience your drive. And that's not
Yes.
news to him. This isn't a
Yes.
surprise. This is how he made you and how he knit you. And so he's going to give you the tools to navigate this gracefully and beautifully as a couple, to be able to learn from one another and have those hard conversations. And maybe you fumble and you figure it out. But he's going to be right alongside you in that journey. And so I think that's really exciting. And I'm so
Yeah.
excited for all these marriages to then turn and realize that, oh
Mm-hmm.
no, I'm not strange for feeling this, and God put these
Yes.
desires in me. And so I think to think of that with that in mind, to know that this isn't a
Yeah.
surprise to him.
Hey friends, thank you so much for hanging with us today as we dive deeper into meaningful, godly intimacy, tackle the hard questions, and embrace truth while we're at it. We're also on Instagram. You can find our handle in the show notes alongside any resource links we mentioned in the show. As always, our hearts are to cultivate deep community and freedom with you guys. We are so honored to walk this journey alongside you. We'll see you in the next episode.